You can't assume your HTML will look as you think it will. You actually need to verify each page by viewing it in a browser. In fact, we recommend viewing it in multiple browsers. Furthermore, sometimes things don't work out at all like you expected or hoped. Errors in your HTML can cause unexpected text to display, for example. In this lesson, we explore setting up a testing process and how to debug HTML code that is not working. Testing. The biggest mistake web developers make is not looking at their pages in multiple browsers. You can't assume your audience will be using the same browser as you, or even on the same platform. And not all browsers render pages the same way. This course focuses on using browsers for PCs and Macs, although there are browsers for any platform connected to the web. The trend seems to be towards using smartphones for viewing web pages, but because of the much smaller viewport, mobile browsing requires a little different philosophy of layout, and I've tried to incorporate this to some degree by emphasizing the use of percentages for lengths whenever possible. Still, there are separate standards for mobile web pages, and these will be addressed in an advanced course later. Even so, there's plenty of useful work for websites, and many more browsers than you would suspect. Wikipedia has a couple of articles of interest in this respect. Here we are at https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/comparison of web browsers. And this is kind of interesting. As you scroll down, you can see this list of browsers alphabetically, and notice how many of them are discontinued in the light purple background. Nonetheless, there are plenty that you had never heard of that are current browsers. Let me scroll down here, and we get to this table, operating system support, and it tells you each browser, whether it runs Windows or Mac OS or Linux or Unix or Android and so on, which is sometimes useful. Another interesting wiki page is wikipedia.org/wiki/usage share of web browsers. The idea here is to find out which browsers are used by the most people, because you want to direct your efforts towards that audience. And you can see currently Chrome is the top browser, the most popular browser, but this keeps changing, and you'll see the rankings of some of the other browsers. We're going to focus on the top ones here, except we'll ignore UC, which is a browser out of China. Not too much interest to most Western developers. Also, here's an interesting site, https://www.webdevelopersnotes.com. And in this page, browsers-list, I thought they did a very nice job of showing all the browsers that are available. And over on the right, you can see the symbol if it works for Windows or Linux or Unix and so on. But there's just an awful lot of browsers available. Still, in terms of market share, a good indicator of which browsers you should test for, the following browsers are where you want to focus your tests. Alphabetically, Chrome from Google, Edge from Microsoft, Firefox from Mozilla, Internet Explorer from Microsoft, Opera from Opera Software, Safari from Apple. Apple used to put out a version of Safari for Windows, but they stopped a few years ago. If you have an iPad, you can test your web pages in Safari on this device. Otherwise, you might skip it. Microsoft Internet Explorer has been replaced in Windows 10 with the Edge browser. So, looking forward, I recommend you focus your testing on Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and Opera. Also, Safari if you have access to a Mac platform. Apple Mac, iPad, even iPhone. Browsers you don't have installed can be downloaded and installed for free from these locations. So the recommended testing approach: download and install the browsers you will test with. Specify one as your default browser and use this one to develop each page. When a page is complete and working, load it into each of your alternate browsers. Check for problems with display, and later with performance. Test each page in both the full screen mode and a reduced screen size. Blocks will often overlap in unexpected ways with a smaller viewport. In the following example, I display our Flying Drones Academy homepage in 4 browsers, both full screen and reduced screen. We start with Firefox, which is my preferred browser, and here's the full screen, and the small screen is what we've actually been demonstrating throughout the lectures. So we close that and go to Chrome, and it looks fine in full screen mode, and reduce it here. I see a little space where it could be wider, a couple of spots actually. We'll think about that. And we go to Opera, again full screen, looks fine, and then we go to reduce screen, and again a couple of spaces that could use some work perhaps. If I stretch the screen, that gets rid of the problems, or most of them. Something to think about. There, that gets rid of it all. Now I go on to Microsoft Edge. Looks just fine in the full screen, and it looks fine in the reduced screen. Debugging. So now you test. What if things don't look right? How do you track down the causes of your errors? First, I'll suggest some common quick checks you can do looking at your code, and then I'll explore some online tools that can help you debug your HTML and CSS. Layout checks. If boxes aren't lining up right or lines seem to be spilling over, there's a few things you can try. Revise values for padding, border, margin, and/or width attributes. Try different values for position, location, float, and clear. If the problems resolve around lists, using some techniques from the next lesson might help you solve the problem, so hang in there and check it out. Sometimes you need to simply revise your design. In all cases, when you make changes, you need to go back and recheck the page in all your browsers. Now some debugging checks. First, typos. Check for the correct spelling of tags, attributes, and keyword values, such as the names of colors. Check for correct case. Now most things in HTML and CSS are case insensitive. So this is mostly for ID values and page names used in href values. Punctuation can be a killer. Have you closed your open quotes? Apostrophes in text can sometimes be treated as quotes, and you may need to code amper APOS semicolon to get the effect of an apostrophe. Missing colons and semicolons can render attribute values unrecognizable to your browser. Hidden paragraphs. There are a number of situations where nesting will implicitly add paragraphs, thus changing your spacing and appearance, such as nesting p tags within each other. P, for example, P nesting of p tags will generate NP hidden paragraphs, NP. What your browser will do in this case is add an implied end P before the first nested P, and an implied P after the first NP, so you end up with 3 paragraphs in reality. Similarly, unclosed or unmatched tags can cause problems. This includes misspelled tags. For example, start paragraph tag blah blah blah, end/O instead of letter P. Confuses the browser. Embedded blanks can be a problem in some situations. For example, you may recall from the lesson on links, we described how you can set up an emailed link. So we have a paragraph tag, send and then an A tag. And our href is a mail to format. And then end the A tag, email to Charlie, and then the /A. You can even include a subject line, you may recall. So in this example, we're mailing it to 2 people, Charlie Brown and Peppermint Patty. the subject is my birthday party. Well, in some situations, the blanks can cause a problem, and you may have to use a special notation using %20 to represent spaces. So that shows up in this example, my %20 birthday %20 party. The rationale for this is beyond the scope of this course, but I wanted to give you a heads up that this may occasionally be needed. Remember, if a browser doesn't recognize a tag, attribute, or value, it is supposed to simply ignore it. If some attribute is not being picked up or displayed, recheck all the points above. And here's a couple of tips. First, develop and test in small increments. Instead of creating a whole page and then testing, write the main pieces, then test, then add in additional parts and test along the way. And second, if you run into problems, use comments to temporarily remove code, test again, and then remove the comments a bit at a time. Online validation tools. I'm a big proponent of manually debugging your own code. It really helps you sharpen your skills and better understand the HTML and CSS components of web pages. But sometimes you just can't see it. There are a variety of online validation tools that will examine your code and let you know if it sees anything that is not in conformance with the standards. Now, this is, strictly speaking, not debugging, but I've found it invaluable to see where my code is in error, so I recommend you give these sites a try. Available from the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, the source of standards for HTML, CSS, and more, are these links. The first one is for validating HTML, the second one for validating CSS, and the third one is a new experimental validator, so we'll try it out. A search will turn up more options, but these seem to be sufficient for our purposes. Let's demonstrate using these tools. So, we'll give these validators a try. First, I created a file based on some of our earlier work and deliberately introduced some errors so we can make sure that it's catching them. For example, down here in the footer style rule, I took off the semicolon after 10 points for the font size. Pretty minor little error. And then in the body, for the HR, I had a style element, a style attribute, and I took off all the punctuation, semicolons and colons. So let's see what it does with that. Then down here, I have BT. There is no such tag as far as we know. I meant BR, but I deliberately put a T there because T is next to R and someone might well type that incorrectly. Then here I've got a class equals laster, and there is no such class. And then finally down here I have class equals lister and detail. And even though because there's a space between them, I should bound them in quotes, but I didn't do that. So that's the file that I created, and let's go over to the validators, and here's the validator.w3.org. Notice you can validate by URI. That means you can key in the address of the web page you want validated, and I've already prepared that. You could validate it by file upload, so you could upload a file directly from your PC, or you could even validate by direct input. That is, you could type the whole thing in, which seems pretty grim. Looking ahead, here is that new HTML checker, the experimental one, so we'll put the URI of the file we want to check, and we'll check the same file here on the CSS validation. So we're ready to run a check. Here we go, and it doesn't take too long. Now, first of all, I have one warning, and then the others are all flagged as errors. The warning says consider adding a lang attribute to the HTML start tag. This is something they would like. It's not a necessity. The lang attribute, we talked about it back in lesson 1 or 2, specifies the language for spell checkers and speech synthesizers and things like that. So you could do that. But the others are errors that have to be fixed. a CSS error missing a semicolon before the property name text align. So that's the one that we took off in the footer style rule. Then there's another one, a parse error on line 76, and here's the line. They show you the line, and so that's where I took off all the semicolons and colons. Have to fix that. Now our error element BT, remember I did that instead of a BR, not allowed as a child element. Turns out there is a BT element. We're not going to talk about it, but there is one. So it says, well, you can't put that inside of a paragraph anyway. So it flags it, and we'll have to go back and change it. And then an end tag, there's an end for the paragraph, but there were open elements, probably the BT. So I think if we change that BT to a BR, that'll clear up that error. And another, yes, here, another unclosed element, BT, there's a start tag but no end tag. So when we fix that, that'll fix several errors. And then finally, attribute detail not allowed on element P. Well, actually, he doesn't know that I meant to have two separate class profiles, so that's because I didn't put quotes around them. So those are the errors that it found. Let's check it out in the new experimental version while we're here, and it looks like it all turns out to be the same. So this is their brand new one, so maybe it's not any different from before. And then here's the CSS validation, and oh, we found errors, and he found these two errors that we are already aware of. So that's the validators. And now let's go and fix these things. Let's see here. Where was that? Oh, here. I have to put quotes around this. Okay. Now, one thing it didn't catch is that there is no class called laster. So that's one of those situations where the browser sees something it doesn't recognize, so he just ignores it, which can't be good either. So you're going to have, those are a little harder to debug. Now here I need to put the colon, semicolon, and colon, semicolon, and colon. I don't really need the last semicolon, but it's really good practice to do that. And then back up in the style element, I'm going to add that semicolon back. Okay, so you make your changes, and I do Control S to save, and I go back to FileZilla and upload it. So now I've got the current version, and I go back and I can rerun the tests. Looks like there's only point is using this one. So now I still have it in there, and I can run check from here. Blah, blah. Huh. I uploaded it. Maybe I need to refresh it. Now let's check. Well, that's better. Still has BT. Did I not get the BT thing fixed? No, there it is. Forgot about it, I guess. So we'll save that. We'll upload. Refurbish. Oh, it already did it now. And the only thing it comes up with now is that warning. So that's the process. Let's rerun the validator here, I guess. Let's see. Guess we'll just go back and check. No errors found. So in this lesson, we focused on making sure your web pages look like you planned, testing, and looking for the source of errors and correcting errors you find, debugging. In the next lesson, we see how HTML can handle lists, and some of this might actually help with layout errors you encounter. See you there.
you.